start off by saying this. Darren Burton is the Chief People Officer at Eightfold AI. He has over 20 years of experience as a strategic advisor, executive, and talent leader. Darren has experience leading in premier organizations, including DuPont, Campbell Soup Company, IBM, and Raytheon Technologies. Most recently, he was the Chief People Officer at KPMG and a member of its management committee. Darren earned a BA with honors in sociology from the University of Oswego and a Master of Industrial and Labor Relations from Cornell University. So with that said, Darren, I am going to hand the keys on over to you. Thanks so much.
Hey, yeah, thanks a lot, Alex, and welcome everyone. We are really looking forward to having this conversation today with Commissioner Sonderling. And I can tell you, being in the people profession as long as I have, that artificial intelligence is one of the hottest topics in the profession. It's just about everywhere. So it's really exciting for us. And perhaps the most significant change that I've seen in my career. And as everyone knows, it's happening, blazing fast. So the reason that we're having this conversation is because our customers requested it. So our goal is to dive deeper into best practices for using AI to reduce employment discrimination across the entire life cycle of employment. So with that said, let me introduce our guests. It's my pleasure to introduce Keith Sonderling, and he is Commissioner for the EEOC, and he has been with the EEOC since 2020. And before that, he was with the U.S. Department of Labor. And one of Commissioner Sonderling's highest priorities is using and ensuring that AI and other forms of workplace technologies are designed and deployed to comply with non-discrimination laws. He has written several publications and speaks globally on the benefits and potential harms of AI and HR. Keith is also advocating a deregulatory approach to AI and HR. And we're excited to discuss how AI is used for interviewing, for hiring, upskilling, promoting, and succession planning. So again, that entire life cycle. Commissioner Sonderling has also published his opinion in the University of Miami Law Review that can be found online. So with that, welcome, Keith.
Darren, thank you so much for having me, and Eightfold for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I think you and I offer two different, unique, but very important perspectives. Me from a regulatory and legal standpoint, and you from a people operations view, and both are very critical to this conversation. So again, thank you, and I'm excited to have be here. Just a quick government disclaimer, of course, all my statements should not be attributable to any other commissioner or the commission. And of course, the government doesn't endorse any products. So I'm just here discussing, the broad use of AI in the workplace. But to that being said, I'm really grateful to HR tech vendors for embracing me, for giving me the platform to talk about my very important message, which we'll get into, about using this technology in a lawful, ethical, and transparent way to really help the workforce, to help workers find their best jobs, to hopefully help us with our mission here at the EEOC, which is to eliminate bias. And I've really been encouraging that relationship with the vendors. And you normally don't see that with the government. Normally you see, as regulators, we do certainly have a certain role as a civil law enforcement authority, but there's another part to it too. And coming from the private sector before government, I know most corporations want to do the right thing, especially for their employees. And when you're dealing with the EEOC laws that we enforce, they're big ticket items. The Me Too movement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, pay equity, all these things that are so important to the culture of organizations. So I really just want to thank vendors broadly for embracing what I'm trying to do here. I think we're all working towards the same goal, to have AI be in the workplace, because as we'll talk about with the changes in the economy and the labor force, and just the complexities of the workplace experience, companies are using technology, are going to have to continue to use that. But how do we do it right in accordance with our civil rights laws, which is really important? And, the EEOC has done some outreach in this. We recently had a hearing on Tuesday for those of you who are in the audience who are watching. And as I said in my opening statement during the hearing, vendors need to be a part of this conversation. It can't just be civil rights group. It can't just be, employers. It can't just be academics. We need to have vendors at the table when we're doing this, because vendors and entrepreneurs, especially where you are out in Silicon Valley, Darren, are the ones innovating, designing, building, and selling these products. They're the ones that know how the products are not only being developed, how they are supposed to be used versus how they're actually being used. And the government just needs to hear more from the vendors in the trenches making this, and from employers who are ultimately responsible for their use on how to implement them. So I'm continuing to encourage, from a Washington, D.C. government perspective, that we just need to continue these conversations with the HR tech community. So everything is going to be designed, built, marketed, sold, all in accordance with our longstanding civil rights laws here in the U.S.
So Keith, that was great. You said a lot there. And it's just amazing to me, again, because things are moving so quickly. And, anytime we have a major shift, like the shift that we're experiencing in technology, the laws and the rules of engagement need to be able to catch up. So I love the statement around the partnership and not really being afraid to reach out to the agencies to have this dialogue that's so critical on how we actually use these new technologies in a way that actually support the agency's approach around non-discrimination in the workplace.
Absolutely. It's so important. And also, just so your audience is aware, because there's a lot of different labor agencies, the EEOC's mission is to prevent and remedy unlawful employment discrimination and advance equal opportunity for all in the workplace. So we really our laws deal with not just current employees, but also applicants as well. And we protect race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, pregnancy, national origin, disability, and genetic information. But key to AI, our laws apply to all work situations. So whether it's hiring, firing, which is a lot of what you hear about when you think about employment law, but it's also promotions, it's also training, it's also wages, it's also benefits, and it prevents retaliation and harassment. So basically, everything in the employee life cycle, the EEOC is there. And even after, employees are no longer with the company, there's protections against retaliation. So what's critical to that is now that AI is literally a part, and there's AI software for every single stage of the job life cycle, from, the beginning decision to create a job description all the way through the end, through termination. And that's why it's so critical that we be involved now, because our laws came from the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And, and they have applied equally since then to decisions made by humans. And what I'm trying to raise awareness of, that laundry list of protected characteristics, the laundry list of where our laws apply equally to HR technology.
So we're going to talk a bit about that, around that approach. But before we get into that, just tell me, and your role in the EEOC, how has this become such a focus for you? Because I've heard you talk about it. I've actually read the publication that you put out in the University of Miami Law Review. So how did this become such a focus for you?
It became, really, it's a great question, because we have so much on our plate here. Every case of discrimination in the United States, whether it's against private employees, employers, state and local governments, the federal governments, comes through the EEOC. So we see all types of discrimination. We still have to deal with the Me Too movement, pay discrimination, everything related to COVID and accommodations and telework. So there's so much out there just on a daily basis to do, right? But I've really tried to be forward thinking. I tried to think, where is HR going? What are the next steps, and what are those complicated new issues that HR professionals and companies are going to be faced? And that overwhelmingly was artificial intelligence in the workplace, and the new technologies that vendors are creating to help employers make decisions. And, you talk about AI, and, it's very popular right now with ChatGPT and everything else. But in the workspace specifically, it's a little different, because when you're talking about AI, using it for your other business lines, whether to make deliveries faster, whether to make accounting spreadsheets go quicker, whether to now draft blogs faster for marketing. That's one thing. That's for a business purpose. And then it is designed to make decisions more efficiently, effectively, and costly. But where I want to get involved and why I'm getting involved is because those decisions are coming into HR. And unlike how do I make a delivery faster? How do I hire somebody? How do I upskill somebody? How do I use AI to do their performance reviews? You're dealing with something different. And the difference there between other uses is you're dealing with some of the most fundamental rights we have in this country. And that's the ability to enter and thrive in the workforce. So that's why it was so important for me to get involved and to get involved, before it's really, I don't want to say too late, but before it gets too far down the road with no guidance, no best practices, and before there's any sort of, major federal action or, worst case scenario, I believe, are lawsuits without employers having those guardrails, having that understanding of using this technology and what the potential benefits are and what some of the potential risks, which at the end of the day are no different than normal HR decisions, but now using technology, it can happen faster and a larger scale than we've ever seen before. So that's really why I said, I need to spend my time because I want this to flourish. It is the future. I want this to take off. And ultimately, like I said, companies are going to be faced with labor shortages, as we're starting to see. And as the economy changes, technology is going to be there in a sense to assist employers of all sizes. So at the EEOC, we have jurisdiction for 15 or more employees. And I think at some point, all these decisions are going to have some component of technology in it. So we really have a duty to make sure that it's aligned with the longstanding employment protections in the United States.
And Keith, to that point, I mean, as you say, we are on the front end of this explosion of technology in the workplace and impacting the entire life cycle as we talked about. So to that point, there's a lot of confusion that's out there. There's a lot of confusion for employers, for employees, for the agencies. I mean, there's just not a lot of knowledge because we are in the front end here. So which areas do you find in employment where we have, practitioners having the most questions about compliance related to AI? So just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that confusion is being stoked by the, whether it's here in Washington, D.C., where you read a lot about, we need new AI laws, we need new AI commissions, or what you're seeing, some state legislators or even cities starting to try to regulate in this area, specifically in employment, or, the EU trying to have a sweeping AI regulation act. And what that does, and when you watch congressional hearings or read about the black box of algorithm decision making and how do we get that expose that in a way, that's a distraction to me. And that's a distraction, I think, for employers and vendors in the sense where, we need new laws. We don't have new AI laws. What is the future going to be? I'm going to be hesitant to, embracing this technology from a developer standpoint, from an investment standpoint, until we have more regulatory certainty out there. And I think that is not the right approach to look at, because the more of that we have that conversation, the distraction is from the longstanding laws, mainly the ones I've read to you at the start, that they're in effect right now. And they've been in effect and they're going to continue to be in effect. So in the employment use of AI, it's really what I'm trying to raise awareness of is like, I understand that there are some state and cities that are putting additional requirements on. However, the underlying requirement has always been there. And it's the same requirements that as HR professionals and business leaders when it comes to equal opportunity in the workplace. And it's the same as far as giving accommodation to workers with disability or making sure that those decisions are not made based upon a protected characteristic. So I'm just trying to hone it back, saying that, whatever the technology your vendors are creating, employers are maybe designing and implementing themselves or buying, that there are already existing laws out there for them. And it's just applying those as you would to a normal decision made by an HR professional. But to answer your question more specifically, a lot of the questions, come on the front end regarding using AI to hire, although, as I said, it's all throughout the employee life cycle, from doing performance reviews to even terminating employees, or handling accommodations. Really, I think the broadest use is relating to getting employees in the workforce. And how do you actually use it in a way to help diversify your workforce, and not discriminate? So that's really the main questions, and understand and sort of, I don't want to say the immediate need for additional clarification is, how do we use it in a way that's going to actually get us the best workers, and get employees in positions that they're qualified for outside of historic barriers where they haven't been able to enter the workforce. So, very classic studies. And, part of the reason our agency exists is related to bias. And there's a lot of bias historically in the recruiting process, in the hiring process. And, the classic textbook examples is a male and a female resume. Applying for the same job, the male is more likely to get selected. Or those who remove characteristics about their race, national origin, are more likely to get selected without those indicators on their resume than not. So a lot of this, has been why this agency has been existing since the 1960s. And there's a lot of AI out there trying to solve those problems of that historical bias, whether it's in job descriptions or the application process, or diversifying the applicant pools, all goals of the EEOC. But generally, it's related to that front end, because that seems to be the highest use now, especially with trying to get workers in the door.
So now you're hitting at the heart of this, right? Because everyone wants to have a perspective on how can the use of AI really reduce discriminatory practices in those components that you just talked about, whether it be reviewing resumes, whether it be interviewing, deciding on the actual selection. So you've been involved in this a lot because you're talking about it a lot, but give me some examples from your perspective on how AI is actually, in a way, being a very positive influence on those processes.
Well, using AI to just take the skills-based approach to hiring, which is something that has absolute bipartisan support. Just this week in DC, the House passed a bill relating to the federal government's workforce, following up on executive orders from, I believe, both President Trump and Biden, to use more a skills-based approach to the federal workforce. So the market is going in that direction. Using skills removes a lot of the traditional biases that have plagued applicants just on the face of their resume, but also, just normal indicators that the EEOC has said you're not allowed to base an employment decision on, using technology to be able to mask some of those. And, I think like a really classic example I like to use is, somebody's name. And what does somebody's name tell you about the ability of that employee to perform the job? It doesn't tell you anything. What it tells you is things that the EEOC told you you're not allowed to make an employment decision off of. But maybe their sex, maybe their religion, maybe their national origin, maybe their race. There's a lot of things that you can infer that somebody who potentially has bias, who wants to make a biased employment decision, easy as, well, let's say male or female, all the female sounding names, I don't want to hire a woman for this position, which is illegal, of course. Just put them in the trash. So using AI, using that skills-based approach to just mask some of those protected characteristics that have nothing to do with the employee's ability to perform the job at scale can really help eliminate bias at the earliest stages of the hiring and recruiting process, in addition to interviewing as well. Now taking whether it's programs that are giving preset questions where you do it digitally, you respond, or through your voice, not seeing a candidate, you immediately don't see some of those biases that you normally would, because what does, absent a very few limited exceptions under the law, a few professions, what somebody looks like, have anything to do with their ability to perform the job. Nothing. It tells you, again, like somebody's name, a lot of various protected classes that you're not allowed to make an employment decision on. And, sometimes if somebody's visibly pregnant or somebody's visibly disabled, those are things you see. But using, technology can really move past some of those historical biases that somebody sees and can't, even though they're not allowed to make that decision on, can't get out of their mind. And it may play a decision, it can help us move past that.
So, Keith, I hear what you're saying about using the existing EEOC framework to be able to deal with the advent of AI and the employment process. Part of what I heard you talk about and you've written about is self-auditing of these technologies by employers. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you're advocating for employers and vendors related to self-auditing?
So this is a really important concept. And it goes back to what I was saying before about the distraction, that there's no, laws related to AI, that there's no duty once you buy AI software. And you could just let it go and it's going to make the most perfect decisions. And we all know that that's not true. And that there is a stage you have to do, internally for those who are operating the software. And you just can't have that, set it and forget it approach like some other technologies are. And, large employers are used to, when buying software, essentially just letting it go and implementing it. And, we'll hopefully make money off of the efficiencies that come with it. But for here, when it's making a decision against somebody's livelihood, it's really important to make sure that there is not only that human oversight and intervention, but things you can do before it actually makes those employment decisions. And a lot of that, I talk about is self-governance and self-audit. So, companies, whatever, industry you're in, you're familiar with, having a lot of regulatory compliance. The healthcare industry, the banking industry, there's just so many regulations that are in effect that companies, before the government gets involved, for best practices, do their own audits internally. In the employment space, companies do their own audits all the time, whether making sure you have good sexual harassment policies that prevent sexual harassment and allow for open door reporting, or pay equity audits, which are really, increasing in popularity because of the heightened awareness of pay inequity and some of the bigger cases that we've seen in the news. So companies or wage and hour audits for overtime, minimum wage, whatever, the potential compliance and risk is, companies have been doing that for a long time, and they've been ensuring that there have best practices in place. And what that happens then, if there is a mistake, if something does go wrong, it can be fixed, and the employee doesn't need to wait for the government to come. The employee then doesn't have to go out and, hope a lawyer will take their case, being willing to do an investigation and sue the company, and it corrects it. And everybody wins in those scenarios. So that's what I'm trying to bring the mindset to artificial intelligence, really for all use. Although, I'm very aware where my jurisdiction is. It's limited to employment. But as I speak globally on these issues and work with other regulators here in the United States and abroad, it's a much bigger part of the conversation of AI governance. And, if you're going to be using AI, create those best practices internally. Make sure that there's oversight, make sure that the people that have access to these systems are not going to then inject their own bias into the systems like they potentially would have during an interview or reviewing a resume, that these programs are being designed to prevent. And, before ever using it in large scale to potentially make employment decisions that will affect tens of thousands of applicants or workers, which you're liable to the EEOC if there's discrimination. What can you do internally before it makes those decisions to make sure it's actually getting the right result, that it's actually getting the best candidates for a job, and it's not unintentionally screening out individuals based upon protected characteristics. And that there's a lot of different ways to get there. And the EEOC has, given guidance on this since 1978 when it comes to employment selections and procedures and testing. And, a lot of that is what are you looking for? What are your job descriptions? What are the actual qualifications? And are those really necessary? And using AI, in a sense, you can, adjust that to make sure that, your potential applicant pool is broad and diverse and representative of the ability to perform the job in real time. So I think a lot of it is just going back to basics, sort of being like a broken record here, but it's so important to understand that, employers, employment lawyers, HR professionals know these laws. They know how to deal with it when there's human making the decisions, and they have best practices in place, and they have handbooks in place. The same needs to happen here, because it at the end of the day, it's those same decisions just being done, assisted with technology.
Yeah, I love that concept of using the technology as an enabler, and clearly monitoring your systems and auditing yourself to ensure that those systems are really delivering the kind of decisions to create equity in the workplace and not be discriminatory. So because there's so much uncertainty related to AI, related to employment, do you think that organizations are afraid to actually report how much they're using AI? And how can the industry just do a better job of differentiating between AI that advances an equitable workplace versus AI that contributes to discrimination?
Yeah, and this is a really tough situation. I think that investors, just starting the whole chain, right? Investors want to invest in AI. You don't need to hear that from me. Just turn on the news. A lot of very smart engineers and computer scientists, much smarter than lawyers like myself, are out there, across the world, wanting to solve problems using AI technology. And a lot of that is in our space here in HR to remove, some of the long standing issues. And employers, like I said, they want to embrace this in a way that furthers their mission, that obviously does not cause harm. And look, with all those products I mentioned before, with all the different uses, there's significant benefits, but there's significant risks. And those risks come from federal employment law. And those risks come from the EEOC. If these programs are not designed properly, if not used in the right manner, it can really potentially scale discrimination much more than any individual. And I think that's where a lot of the fear is. And also, going back to the chain here, investors, developers, and buyers, nobody wants a product that's going to discriminate. Nobody wants to invest in a product that's going to discriminate. Nobody can sell a product that's going to discriminate, and nobody's going to buy a product that is going to discriminate. But, some of that can still happen, even if it's not intentional. But on the way the law is, that whether discrimination is intentional or not, it doesn't matter. The employer is liable for those decisions. So I think that's generally where some, I don't want to say the hesitancy of reporting, but, of where the fear is of how do we be able to make sure that everyone involved in this chain is building these programs in accordance with our long standing laws. And a lot of that is on us here at the EEOC. A lot of that is taking these older laws and showing that they're not outdated and they apply to technology the same way they apply to humans. And we're starting to do that at the federal government. Here at the EEOC, we've launched an initiative at the commission relating to artificial intelligence. It's in our strategic, draft strategic enforcement plan that we're going to be paying attention to technology. And then last May, we released, the first guidance on this relating to the Americans with Disability Act, giving best practices and talking specifically about how these programs can potentially discriminate against individuals with disabilities if they don't have potential accommodations built into them, so individuals with varying disabilities can still use the programs accordingly. And we're continuing to raise the awareness of this, continuing to put out documents like that allows the employers who are ultimately implementing this to make sure those the vendor does that. But more importantly, it allows the vendors and the engineers to build these programs off of what we say, here's how somebody with a disability needs an accommodation to use your software. So I think the more we continue from the government, and in the medical device area, the FDA is putting out guidance, the FTC is putting out information about the advertising and all this. So all of us, from a holistic point here in the government, need to continue to provide that information in the areas of law we know best, so the vendors can then rely on that when they're building the software, and the employers can also use that as a backstop to the vendors, not only questioning them about it, but also in that implementation phase as well. So hopefully it's in all of government reports. As you know, the White House released the Bill of Rights a few months ago, kind of outlining the broad principles relating to transparency, not using AI for discrimination. So, but now it's getting more specific, using it for each agency and each area of law.
So Keith, you started to touch on best practices. So, clearly there's a lot of technology out there, and there are a lot of vendors as well. So let's talk about some of just the essential questions that HR professionals or business leaders should be asking when they're considering an AI vendor in their business.
Well, let me just start from the law enforcement perspective here. It's, from our perspective, whatever the algorithm is, whatever, decision AI makes or assists the employer to make, liability is going to be the same either way. So whether you're using the AI in a discriminatory fashion, saying, I want to use AI to screen out all people of a certain protected characteristics, or you're not, you're looking to use AI based upon some skill that is unnecessary for the job, and then has the result of screening out somebody of a certain protected characteristic when that was not at all required, and it just has that discriminatory result. Liability is going to be the same either way. And really deciding to entrust algorithms with someone's livelihood, it's a very complex matter. But, that being said, employers now are in the position with the buying power to ask the vendors tough questions. And the vendors that can answer those questions and are committed to assisting the employers, are going to be the ones who are going to continue to try to design these programs. And from my perspective, and just broadly taking a step back so you understand from the government's perspective, like I said, when we walk into an investigation, our federal investigators, what do they know? They know how to see, if they look at the results, and they can look at the results to see if through discrimination. They're not computer scientists. They're not going to understand the algorithm, just like judges may not, just like lawyers like myself may not, but they're going to look at the results. And the results are going to show, how did we get there? And in AI, it could be potentially even more transparent, with a digitized record, opposed to what we're left with now, which is, you talk about the black box of AI, but what about the black box of somebody's brain? And how do you get there? It's through questioning and examining and depositions. But now we may have it in a more transparent way, where we can figure out, okay, was it discriminatory use of the algorithm? Was it an incomplete data set? So in a way, it could be more transparent. So with that understanding of how our investigations are going to work in this concept, right? That whether it's a non-representative data set that caused a discrimination, let's say it was just all male applicants and that's what the computer looked for, or is a diverse data set and somebody went in and tried to filter it, improperly against the use of, the intended use of the program, we're going to look at the end. So that being said, employers who want to buy AI, knowing that, and really, push the vendors and ask the vendors that, how are you going to make sure that in my company, in my, pool of potential employees, or in my industry where these skills are necessary, how are you going to make sure that your AI and your programs are going to actually have those right characteristics in there? Not broadly in the aggregate, but specific to my company, because that is what the EEOC is going to look at. And, asking those vendors to help as it applies specifically to that specific use, it is really what employers have now to be able to be put at ease to buy some of these products, because that's what the EEOC is going to look at, not broad stroke applicability of these programs to generic data sets, but it's how it is used at your company, within your industry, and how is that going to match, opposed to just saying, here's a generic software that you could use in any industry. Well, then that's going to be a lot harder to show the relevancy of those decisions to prove that there's no discrimination.
Yeah. I actually did read your paper, and there were some fascinating concepts in there. And one of them was to this point around employers' responsibility, meaning understand their data, the data set that they're actually putting into the technology, understanding the algorithm, and then being able to monitor what the outcomes are and where adjustments need to be made, make those adjustments based on those outcomes. So, clearly this, approach around, auditing and monitoring is something that, business leaders are really familiar with, related to any introduction of a new concept in their business. Correct. So I think that, that part of the paper really resonated with me.
Right. And it's when we say about your data, I think the misconception or the misunderstanding, and thank you for raising that point in the paper, it's because this is the employers are the ones with the jobs. The employers are the ones generally creating the job descriptions based upon what they think are the skills needed. Now, AI can assist with that. It can make it more inclusive in a way, but the data set is also from the employers as well, because it's if it's one position and, the employer is saying, well, using our business judgment, this is what we need in that candidate, then, that set, whether it's a complete diverse set of applicants or not, is really going to be largely based upon those decisions, if those applicant pool even exists, right? So that's really a key for employers to understand. You're the ones creating the positions. You're the ones who have to take the applicant pools or look for it and recruit for it. And, making sure that that's inclusive as well, and making sure that's actually lined up to the skills for the job. And that's where the whole know your data is. And it's translating data, which sounds like a computer science term, into an HR term, Darren, which you understand very much. It's just like, okay, who's my applicant pool? What are the qualifications? What are the skills? But now that's turning into computer data, but ultimately that's the employer's responsibility for creating and deciding.
So Keith, thanks for that. So again, because this is so new, are there areas that you would recommend that practitioners go to understand, what is the best thinking on the topic? What's the latest information? Are there, places where they should be, following kind of these trends?
Well, how about I give you a lawyer answer and saying, follow the law. No, I mean, there's a lot of, the HR community, like I said, and the HR tech community has really embraced this, and they're not, running away. Vendors, there's a lot of vendor conferences out there. HR conferences are now largely turning into HR tech conferences, even some of the more traditional ones. So industry is really up on this, but really continue to follow the EEOC. You can continue to follow, my work individually that I've been talking about, really diving into this. But also, I would say broadly watch what other jurisdictions are doing. And especially for large employers who operate in different jurisdictions, what's happening in New York, I think is something certainly everyone's watching, and what's happening in Europe as well. So there's going to be a lot of continued discussion on an individualized government level about what to do here. But from the EEOC's perspective, we have to look at this broadly. We can't do what Illinois did and just, put guardrails on facial recognition and just focus on facial recognition. Our laws cover literally every, aspect of the employment relationship. So we still have to look broadly at all those. And that's why, disability was first, and, disability discrimination outside of retaliation is our, number one core claim of discrimination. So that's why we addressed the ability for employers and vendors to know what their obligations are under the Americans with Disability Act when it comes to using AI technology, from the ability to actually use the programs to ensuring that the programs are not soliciting unlawful medical information, which you're prohibited from doing under the Americans with Disability Act. So in short, it's just really keeping up with governments as well. But again, the HR community at this point, largely, most trade publications are following this very closely.
Yeah, I got it. So listen, before we move on to Q&A, I just want to say that this is such an exciting area. And it's one of the reasons why I got involved in this technology space, because again, it's probably the most impactful thing that I will experience in my career. And what we've been all trying to accomplish is to create an opportunity, a marketplace for employment where discrimination is really not an issue. And if technology can help solve for that, this is an exciting time for us. So Alex, I think it's time to now move on to Q&A.
Sure is. Yeah, let me help transition over here for a moment. Just want to thank everybody that joined us via live stream on LinkedIn Live. I will be saying that the LinkedIn Live stream will be coming to an end now, but want you to know that the recording will remain on LinkedIn to be watched on demand. So if you're interested in more of Keith's content, one, we do welcome you to check out the podcast episode with Keith on the new Talent Code podcast, which you can find on our website or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. If you're attending via Zoom, please stay online. We're going to be jumping into a time of Q&A right now. But again, thank you everyone who attended via LinkedIn Live, and that will be coming to an end.